The strange condition of the human mind, that seems to need to stay in selfish error for a long time before it dares to get close to the selfless truth. Magendie. The truth that I defend is marked on all of the records of the past. To understand history, one must study the ancient symbols, the sacred signs of the priesthood, and the art of healing in early times. That's an art that's forgotten today. Baron du Patet. It is a constant truth that fact, when piled up in disorder, it then begins to form some order of a theory that is put among them. Herbert Spencer. Now we must look through magical history for cases like those in the last chapter. This lack of feeling in the human body to strong blows, and its resistance to being pierced by sharp points in musket bullets, is a common event known throughout all times and countries. While science cannot fully explain this mystery, the question seems easy for mesmerists to explain. They have studied the properties of the fluid well. A person who can, by a few hand motions over a limb, that makes it locally unable to feel, so that it literally does not feel burns, cuts, and needle pricks. This is why we should not be very surprised by the Jansenist events. As for those skilled in magic, especially in Siam and the East Indies, they know the properties of the akasha, the mysterious life fluid, too well to even think of the convulsionary's lack of feeling as a very great phenomenon. The astral fluid can be pressed around a person to form a flexible shield that cannot be broken by any physical object, no matter how fast it moves. In short, this fluid can be made to equal and even be better than water and air in its power to resist. In India, Malabar, and some parts of Central Africa, the magic workers will freely let any traveler shoot a musket or revolver at them. They do not touch the weapon themselves or choose the bullets. In Lang's books Travels among Timani, and the Karankos, and the Solaimas, there is a description by an English traveler. He was the first white man to visit the Solaimas tribe, near the sources of the Dialaba. It tells of a very strange scene. A group of chosen soldiers shot at a chief who had nothing to defend himself with but certain good luck charms. Although their muskets were properly loaded and aimed, no bullet could hit him. Salvert gives a similar case in his book, Philosophy of Occult Sciences, that said, in 1568, the Prince of Orange ordered a Spanish prisoner to be shot at by Juliers. The soldiers tied him to a tree and fired at him, but he could not be harmed. They finally stripped him to see what armor he wore but found only an amulet. When this was taken from him, he fell dead at the first shot. This is very different from the clever tricks Udine used in Algeria. He himself prepared bullets of tallow, colored black with soot. He then cleverly swapped them for the real bullets that the Arab sheiks thought they were putting into the pistols. The simple natives, knowing nothing but real magic that they had received from their ancestors, that always involves one specific thing that they can do without knowing why or how. Udine saw, as they thought, that he achieved the same results in a more impressive way, and they imagined he was a greater magician than themselves. Many travelers, including the writer that has seen examples of this inability to be harmed where cheating was impossible. A few years ago, an Abyssinian man lived in an African village and was thought to be a sorcerer. Once, a group of Europeans, going to Sudan, entertained themselves for an hour or two by firing at him with their own pistols and muskets. He allowed them to do this for a small payment. As many as 5 shots were fired at the same time by a Frenchman named Langlois. The ends of the guns were no more than 2 yards from the sorcerer's chest. In each case, at the same time as the flash, the bullet would appear just beyond the end of the gun, shaking in the air. Then, after making a small curve, it would fall harmlessly to the ground. A German in the group, who was looking for ostrich feathers, offered the magician a 5-franc coin if he would let him fire his gun with the end touching his body. The man at first refused. But, finally, after seeming to talk with someone inside the ground, he agreed. The experimenter carefully loaded, and pressing the end of the weapon against the sorcerer's body, after a moment's pause, fired. The barrel broke into pieces as far down as the handle, and the man walked away unharmed. This quality of being unable to be harmed can be given to people by both living experts and by spirits. In our own time, several well-known mediums have often, in front of very respectable witnesses, not only handled burning coal but actually putting their face on a fire without burning a single hair, and even placed flaming coal on the heads and hands of people standing by, as happened with Lord Lindsay and Lord Adair. The well-known story of the Indian chief, who told Washington that at Braddock's defeat he had fired his rifle at him 17 times from a short distance without being able to hit him. That will come to the reader's mind here. In fact, many great leaders have been believed by their soldiers to have what is called a charmed life. Prince Emil von Wittgenstein, who was a general of the Russian army, that is said to be one of these. The same power that lets someone squeeze the astral fluid to make an unbreakable shield around themselves can also be used to send, you might say, a blast of this fluid at something with deadly force. Many dark acts of revenge have been done this way. In such cases, the coroner's official inquiry will only show a sudden death. It will seem to be from a heart problem, a stroke, or some other natural cause, but it is not the real cause. Many people strongly believe that certain individuals have the power of the evil eye. The malocchio, or jettatura, is a belief common throughout Italy and southern Europe. The Pope is thought to have, perhaps without knowing it, this unpleasant ability. There are people who can kill toads just by looking at them and can even kill other people. The strong bad feeling of their wish brings evil forces together. The deadly blast is then sent out, as if it was a bullet from a rifle. In 1864, in the French area of Le Var, near the small village of Brignoles, a farmer named Jacques Pellissier lived. He earned a living by killing birds using only willpower. His story is told by the well-known Dr. Dalger. At Drive Dalger's request, the unusual hunter showed his method to several scientists. The story goes like this: about 15 or 20 steps from us, I saw a lovely little meadow lark which I showed to Jacques. He said, "Watch him closely, sir, he is mine." Immediately stretching his right hand toward the bird, he came close to it gently. The meadow lark stops, raises and lowers its pretty head and spreads its wings, but cannot fly. At last, it cannot move another step and let itself be taken, only moving its wings with a weak flutter. I examined the bird. Its eyes were tightly closed, and its body is stiff like a corpse, although its heart beats very clearly. It is in a true cataleptic sleep, and all of the signs clearly proves a magnetic action, and 14 little birds were caught in this way within an hour. None could stand against the power of Master Jacques, and all showed the same cataleptic sleep. Moreover, this sleep ends when the hunter wishes, and these little birds have become his humble servants. Perhaps 100 times, I asked Jacques to bring his prisoners back to life and movement. I asked him to charm them only partly, so they might hop along the ground, and then bring them completely under the charm again. All of my requests were met exactly, and this remarkable hunter never failed once. He finally said to me, "If you wish it, I will kill those you point out without touching them." I pointed out 2 for the experiment, and from 25 or 30 steps away, he did what he promised in less than 5 minutes. A very strange part of this case is that Jacques only had full power over sparrows, robins, goldfinches, and meadowlarks. He could sometimes charm skylarks, but, as he said, they often escape me. This same power is used with greater force by people known as wild beast tamers. On the banks of the Nile, some of the local people can charm crocodiles out of the water with a uniquely pleasant, low whistle. And they can handle these animals without harm. Others have this type of power over the deadliest snakes. Travelers tell of seeing these charmers surrounded by many reptiles, which they get rid of as they wish. Bruce, Hasselquist, and Lampriere all confirm they have seen in Egypt, Morocco, Arabia, and especially in the Sennar, some local people who literally ignore the bites of the most poisonous vipers, as well as the stings of scorpions. They handle and play with these creatures and can make them go into a dazed state when they choose. Salvard says, "The Latin and Greek writers in vain assures us that the gift of charming venomous reptiles was passed down in certain families from ancient times. They also say that in Africa, the Scilli enjoyed the same gift, and the Marses in Italy and the Ophiocines in Cyprus had it too. The doubters forget that, in Italy, even at the beginning of the 16th century, there were men who claimed to be related to the family of St. Paul who bravely faced snake bites, just like the Marses." He continues to say, doubts about this subject was removed forever when the French went to Egypt. The following story is confirmed by thousands of people who saw it. Bruce said, "The Scilli, who claimed to have the ability to charm, went from house to destroy snakes of every kind. A wonderful instinct first drew them to where the snakes were hidden, and hearing furious howling and foaming, they grabbed and tore the snakes apart with their nails and teeth. Salvert said, "Let us put aside a deep-rooted doubter himself, with the howling and the fury as a mere show. Still, the instinct that warned the silly of the snake's presence has something more real in it. In the Antilles, when the black people find a snake, they do not find it by its smell. In Egypt the same skill was once had, and it is still enjoyed by men that was raised with it from childhood. They are born with what seems like a family gift to hunt snakes and to find them even from a distance too great for the smell to be noticed by the dull senses of a European. The main fact, above all others, is the ability to make dangerous animals powerless just by touching them, that remains well proven. Perhaps we will never understand the nature of this secret better, that was famous in ancient times, but was kept from our time by the most uneducated of men. Music is pleasing to everyone. A low whistle, a pleasant song, or the sounds of a flute will always attract reptiles in countries where they are found. We have seen and confirmed these things many times. In Upper Egypt, whenever our caravan stopped, a young traveler who thought he played the flute very well entertained the group by playing. But the camel drivers and other Arabs always stopped him. They had been annoyed several times by the unexpected appearance of different families of reptiles that usually avoid meeting men. Finally, our caravan met a group that included professional serpent charmers, and then the skilled musician was invited, but for the sake of an experiment, to show his ability. As soon as he started, a slight rustling was heard. The musician was horrified to suddenly see a large snake appear dangerously close to his legs. The serpent, with its head up and eyes fixed on him, slowly, and as if without knowing it, crawled. It gently moved its body in waves, following his every movement. Then another appeared in the distance, then a third, and a fourth. These were quickly followed by others, until we found ourselves in quite a chosen group. Several of the travelers headed for the backs of their camels, while others sought safety in the cantinier's tent. But it was a needless fright. The charmers, 3 in number, began their songs and magic words, while attracting the reptiles. Very soon they was covered with them from head to foot. As soon as the serpents came near the men, they showed signs of sluggishness and were soon put into a deep trance. Their eyes were half closed and glassy, and their heads drooped. Only one stubborn snake remained. It was a large and shiny black one with a spotted skin. This melomaniac of the desert continued gracefully nodding and leaping, as if it had danced on its tail its whole life, and keeping time to the flute's notes. This snake would not be tempted by the Arab's charming but kept slowly moving toward the flute player, who at last ran away. The modern Sicilian then took a half-withered plant from his bag. He kept waving it toward the serpent. It had a strong smell of mint. As soon as the reptile caught its smell, it followed the Arab, still standing upright on its tail, but now moving toward the plant. A few more seconds, and the traditional enemy of man was seen wrapped around the arm of its charmer. It became dazed in its turn, and then all of them was thrown together in a pool, after having their heads cut off. Many people believe that all of these types of snakes are prepared and trained for this purpose. They think the snakes either have their fangs removed or their mouths sewn shut. There may be some lesser tricksters whose deceptions have led to this idea. But the genuine serpent charmer has proven his abilities too well in the East to use such cheap tricks. There is too much trustworthy evidence from many travelers, including some scientists, for them to be accused of such fakery. Forbes confirms that the snakes, which are charmed to dance, become harmless, but are still poisonous. He says, on the music stopping too suddenly, or for some other reason, the serpent, who had been dancing within a circle of country people, suddenly darted among the people watching. It bit a young woman in the throat. She died in great pain half an hour later. Many travelers say that the black women of Dutch Guiana, and the Obeah women, are very good at taming large snakes called amadites, or papa. They make these snakes come down from trees, follow them, and obey them just by talking to them. We have seen in India a small group of fakirs living around a little lake, or really a deep pool of water. The bottom of this pool was completely covered with huge alligators. These water and land monsters crawl out and warm themselves in the sun, a few feet from the fakirs. Some of the fakirs may be still, and deep in prayer and thought. As long as one of these holy beggars can be seen, the crocodiles are as harmless as kittens. But we would never tell a foreigner to risk himself alone within a few yards of these monsters. The poor Frenchman Pradin found an early death in one of these terrible reptiles, commonly called Mudala by the Hindus. When Iamblichus, Herodotus, Pliny, or some other ancient writer tells us of priests who made snakes appear from the altar of Isis, or of miracle workers taming the fiercest animals with a look, but they are thought of as liars and foolish people. When modern travelers tell us of the same wonders happening in the East, they are labeled as overly excited talkers or untrustworthy writers. Despite doubts from those who believe only in material things, humans do have these types of powers, as we see shown in the examples above. When the study of the mind and the study of the body becomes true sciences, Europeans will be convinced of the strange strong power that exists in the human will and imagination. This power can be used whether a person is aware of it or not. And yet, how easy it is to understand such a power in the spirit. We just need to think of the great truth in nature, that every tiny atom in it is moved by spirit. This spirit is one in its basic nature, and the smallest part of it represents the whole. But matter is simply a physical copy of an abstract idea, after all. In this regard, let us give a few examples of the commanding power of even the unconscious will. It can create things according to the imagination, or rather, the ability to see images in the astral light. We only need to remember the very common events of stigmata, or birthmarks. These are effects created by the unintended power of a mother's imagination when she is excited. The fact that a mother can control what her unborn child looks like, that was so well known among ancient people. It was common for wealthy Greeks to place beautiful statues near the bed, so the mother would always have a perfect model before her eyes. The clever trick by which the Hebrew leader Jacob caused calves with striped and spotted fur to be born shows this rule among animals. Arikanti tells of 4 litters of puppies, born one after another from healthy parents. Some of the puppies in each litter were well formed, while the rest had no front legs and had a split lip. The works of Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire, Burdock, and Elam contain stories of many of these types of cases. Dr. Prosper Lucas's important book, Sur l'Erudite Naturelle, has many of them. Elam quotes from Pritchard an example where the child of a black person and a white person had black and white skin in different parts of the body. He adds, with honest sincerity, these are unusual things for which, in the current state of science, no explanation can be given. It is a shame that his example was not copied more often. Among the ancient writers, Empedocles, Aristotle, Pliny, Hippocrates, Galen, Marcus Damascenus, and others give us accounts just as amazing as those from writers of our own time. In a book printed in London in 1659, a strong argument is made against those who only believe in material things. It does this by showing the power of the human mind over the subtle forces of nature. The author Dr. Moore sees the unborn baby as a soft substance. This substance can be shaped by the mother into a pleasing or unpleasing form. It can look like one person, or parts of several people. It can be marked with the image, or as we might better call it, the astrograph, or of something that's clearly imagined by her. These effects can be made by her on purpose or by accident, with her knowing or not knowing, weakly or strongly, depending on the situation. It depends on her not knowing or knowing the deep secrets of nature. Looking at women in general, the marking of the unborn baby might be more by chance than by plan. And since each person's aura in the astral light is filled with images of their immediate family, the sensitive surface of the unborn baby, which can almost be compared to a photographic plate, that is likely to be marked with the image of a close or distant ancestor. The mother may have never seen this ancestor, but at some important moment, the image came into the focus of nature's camera, so to speak. Dr. Elam says, "Near me is seated a visitor from a distant continent, where she was born and taught." That is the picture of a distant female ancestor, from far back in the last century, that hangs on the wall. In every feature, one is an exact copy of the other, although one never left England, and the other was American by birth and half-parentage. The power of the imagination over our physical state, even after we grow up, is shown in many common ways. In medicine, a smart doctor, by what he says, does not hesitate to give it more power to heal or cause sickness than his medicines. He calls it the healing power of nature. His first effort is to gain his patient's trust completely, so that he can cause nature to remove the disease. Fear often kills. Grief has so much power over the subtle fluids of the body that it cannot only upset the inside organs, but it can even turn the hair white. Ficinus mentions the signature of the unborn babies with the birthmarks of cherries and various fruits, colors, hairs, and growths. He agrees that the mother's imagination can cause the mark to look like an ape, pig, or dog, or any type of animal. Marcus Damascenus talks of a girl covered with hair and, like our modern Julia Pastrana, having a full beard. Gulielmus Paradinus tells of a child whose skin and nails looked like those of a bear. Baldainus Ronceus tells of one born with a turkey's fleshy growths. Perius tells of one with a head like a frog. Avicenna tells of chickens with hawks' heads. In this last case, that perfectly shows the power of the same imagination in animals, such as in the unborn chick that must have been marked at the moment the hen's imagination saw a hawk, either in real life or in her mind. This is clear, for Dr. Moore, who mentions this case based on Avicenna, who very fittingly notes that the egg in question might have been hatched 100 miles away from the hen. The tiny picture of the hawk impressed on the unborn chick, that must have grown larger and became perfect as the chicken grew, but completely separate from any later influence from the hen. Cornelius Gemma tells of a child born with a wounded bleeding forehead. This was because the father threatened the mother with a drawn sword that he directed toward her forehead. C. Nertius records the case of a pregnant woman. She saw a butcher cut a pig's head with his cleaver. This affected her so much that her child was born with its face split in the upper jaw, in the roof of the mouth, and upper lip all the way to the nose. In Van Helmont's book on injected materials, there is some very surprising cases that are reported. The wife of a tailor at Mechlin was standing at her door. She saw a soldier's hand cut off in a fight. This so strongly affected her that it caused her to give birth early. Her child was born with only one hand, and the other arm was bleeding. In 1602, Marcus de Vogler's wife, a merchant of Antwerp, saw a soldier who had just lost his arm. She went into labor and gave birth to a daughter with one arm cut off and bleeding, just like in the first case. Van Helmont gives a third example of another woman who saw 13 men beheaded by order of the Duc d'Alva. The horror of what she saw was so overwhelming that she suddenly went into labor and gave birth to a perfectly formed infant. Only the head was missing, but the neck was bloody like the bodies she saw that had their heads cut off. And what makes the mystery even greater is that the hand, arm, and head of these infants, none of them was to be found. If it were possible to imagine such a thing as a miracle in nature, then the cases above of the parts of the unborn human body suddenly disappearing might be called that. We have searched in vain through the most recent experts on the human body from science, for any good theory to explain even the least unusual of unborn baby marks. The most they can do is record examples of what they call spontaneous varieties of types. Then they either fall back on Mr. Proctor's strange coincidences or admit they do not know, like authors who are not fully satisfied with human knowledge. Magendie admits that despite scientific studies, relatively little is known about unborn life. On page 518 of the American edition of his book Elementary Handbook of Physiology, he gives a case where the umbilical cord was broken and perfectly healed. Then he asks, how was the circulation carried on in this organ? On the next page, he says, nothing is currently known about the purpose of digestion in the unborn baby. Regarding its feeding, he asks this question, what then can we say of the nutrition of the unborn baby? Books on body science contain only vague opinions on this point. On page 520, the following words appear, because of some unknown cause, the different parts of the unborn baby sometimes develop in a very unusual way. With a strange lack of consistency and with his earlier admissions of science's lack of knowledge on all of these points that we have quoted, he adds, there is no reason to believe that the mother's imagination can have any effect on the formation of these deformities. Besides, such growths are seen daily in the offspring of other animals and even in plants. How perfectly this shows the ways of scientific men. The moment they go beyond what they have already directly observed, their judgment seems to become completely twisted, because their conclusions from their own research are often much weaker than those made by others, who have to get the facts second-hand. The science books often show this truth. When we consider how materialistic observers reason about mind-related events, this rule is very clear. Those whose souls are blind are naturally unable to tell the difference between the causes from the mind and the effects in the body. This is like how colorblind people cannot tell scarlet from black. Elam, even though he is not a spiritualist and is actually against it, who expresses the belief of honest scientists in these words, it is certainly impossible to explain how matter and mind can act on each other. This mystery is agreed on by all to be unsolvable and will probably always remain so. A great English expert on the subject of bad formations wrote the book The Science and Practice of Medicine, by William Aitken, M.D., of Edinburgh, who was a professor of pathology in the Army Medical School. The American edition of this book, by Professor Meredith Clymer, M.D., of the University of Pennsylvania, has equal importance in the United States. On page 233 of Volume 1, we find the topic discussed in detail. The author says, the old beliefs, illogical ideas, and the strange causes that was given for such bad formations, are now quickly disappearing. This is because of the clear explanations of those famous experts in body structure, who has made the growth and development of the egg a special area of study. It is enough to mention here the names, J. Muller, Ratlick, Bischoff, Saint-Hilaire, Burdock, Alan Thompson, G. W. Verlick, Wolf, Meckel, Simpson, Rokitansky, and von Amann. This shows enough proof that hopefully in time the truths of science will remove the clouds of not knowing and of discrediting old beliefs. One would think, from the calm way that this important writer speaks, that we now have an easy way to solve this complex problem, but if not, we at least have a hint to guide us through our difficulties. But, in 1872, after using all of the work and cleverness of the famous pathologist that's listed above, but now we find him making the same admission of not knowing just as Magendie did in 1838. He says, nevertheless, a lot of mystery still surrounds how bad formations begin. Their origin can be looked at in two main ways. 1. They are due to an original bad formation of the germ. 2. They are due to later changes in the embryo that's caused by things affecting its development. Regarding the first question, it is believed that the germ may be originally badly formed, or faulty, because of some influence coming either from the female, or from the male. An example of this is when the same parents repeatedly have children with the same kind of bad formation, and this shows there is problems on either side or both sides being passed down as a family trait. Without any ideas of their own to explain the injuries, the scientists who study diseases, by following their natural job with instinct, they just deny them. By saying there is no real proof that such a deformity can be caused by mental effects on pregnant women. Birthmarks and skin spots are said to be due to unhealthy states of the egg's layers. A very commonly accepted cause of bad formation is slowed growth of the unborn baby. The cause of this is not always clear, because it is mostly hidden. The temporary forms of the unborn human baby are like lasting forms of many lower animals. Can the learned professor explain why? The bad formations are the result of a stop in development that often causes them to look like animals. Exactly, but why do disease scientists not tell us why this is happening? Any expert in body structure, who has made the growth and development of the early form of the unborn baby a subject of special study can tell what daily experience and the evidence of his own eyes shows him, without much thinking. At least up to a certain point, the early human form is an exact copy of a young frog-like creature just after it leaves the egg. It looks like a tadpole. But no body scientist or structure expert seems to have thought of applying the Pythagorean hidden teaching of the passing of souls, that is wrongly understood by critics, but it is about the development of human beings. This applies from the very first moment it appears physically as a germ to its final shape and birth. The meaning of the secret rule is, a stone becomes a plant becomes a beast becomes a man, etc., that was mentioned in another place. That is in relation to the spiritual and physical development of man on this earth. We will now add a few more words to make the idea clearer. From what is the first shape of the future man? Some body scientists say a grain, or a tiny particle. Others say a molecule, an egg within an egg. If it could be examined, by a light tool or otherwise, what would we expect to find it made of? By comparison, we would say, a center of non-living matter, left by the blood flow at the starting point, and joined with a deposit of living matter. In other words, this very tiny center of the future man is made of the same parts as a stone. And it is made of the same parts as the earth, that the man is meant to live on. Moses is mentioned by those who study the Kabbalah as the authority for the idea that it took earth and water to make a living being. Then it can be said that man first appears as a stone. After 3 or 4 weeks, the egg has taken on a plant-like look. One end has become round and the other narrow, like a carrot. When cut open, it is found to be made, like an onion, of very thin layers or coverings, holding a liquid inside. The layers come close to each other at the lower end, and the early form hangs from the root of the navel almost like some fruit from a branch. The stone has now changed, by the passing of souls, into a plant. Then the early creature begins to push out its limbs, from the inside outward, and then its face parts develop. The eyes can be seen as 2 black dots. The ears, nose, and mouth form hollows, like the points of a pineapple, before they begin to stick out. The early form develops into an animal-like unborn baby, in the shape of a tadpole. And like a water and land reptile, it lives in water and grows from it. Its single living unit has not yet become human or undying, because the Kabbalists tell us that this only happens at the 4th hour. One by one, the unborn baby takes on the features of a human being. The first gentle movement of the undying breath passes through its being, and when it moves, nature opens the way for it, then it brings it into the world. And the divine essence settles in the baby's body, that it will live in until the moment of physical death, when man becomes a spirit. The secret process of forming a baby over 9 months is called the completion of the individual cycle of evolution that was known by the Kabbalists. Just as a baby forms from the amniotic fluid in the womb, that is the same as Earth that grows from the universal ether, or astral fluid, that's in the womb of the universe. These cosmic children, like their tiny inhabitants, are first centers, then eggs, then they slowly grow. Becoming mothers in their turn, they create minerals, plants, animals, and humans in all forms. From the center to the edge, from the tiny bubble to the farthest imaginable limits of the universe, these wise thinkers, the Kabbalists, see cycles joining into cycles. These cycles contain and are contained in an endless series. This includes the baby growing in its early stage, the person in their family, the family in the state of love, that is the state in all people, and of the earth in our solar system, because that system is in its central universe, and the universe is in the cosmos, and the cosmos is in the first cause, that is the boundless and the endless. This is how their idea of development goes. All are only parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is, and God is the soul. Worlds without number lie in this bosom like children. While everyone agrees that physical causes, such as blows, accidents, and poor food for the mother, affect the unborn baby in a way that risks its life, and while also admitting that emotional causes, such as fear, sudden terror, deep sadness, or even extreme joy, may slow the growth of the unborn baby or even kill it, many body scientists agree with Megendi in saying, there is no reason for believing that the imagination of the mother can have any influence in the formation of deformities. This is only because these things are seen daily in the creation of other animals and even in plants. Leading experts in birth defects today support this idea. Although Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire gave the new science its name, and its facts are based on the thorough experiments of Bichat. Bichat was known in 1802 as the person who started the study of body structure by looking at parts and ideas. One of the most important writings about birth defects is the detailed paper by G.J. Fisher, M.D., from Sing Sing, New York. It is called Diplodoratology, an essay on compound human monsters. This writer sorts out monstrous unborn growths into their groups and kinds and adds thoughts based on their unique features. Following Saint-Hilaire, he divides the history of the subject into the mythical, the proven, and the scientific times. For our purpose, it is enough to say that in the current state of scientific thought, on 2 points that are considered settled, 1. That the mother's mental state has no effect on causing birth defects. 2. That most types of birth defects can be explained by the idea of stopping and slowing down development. Fisher says, by carefully studying the rules of development and the order in which the various organs appear in the embryo, it has been observed that deformities that result from a fault or stop in development are to some extent permanent embryos. The abnormal organs simply show the first state of formation as it was in an early stage of an embryo or fetal life. With the study of the body in such a confessed state of confusion as it is now, it seems a bit bold for any expert in birth defects, no matter how great his work is in body structure on the tiny parts of early development, but to take such a risky stand as to say the mother has no effect on her child. While the microscopes of Haller and Perlich, Darst and Larrey-Bullet have shown us many interesting facts about the early single or double marks on the yolk sac membrane, but what remains unknown about early development by modern science seems even greater. If we agree that birth defects are the result of a stop in development, or even if we go further and agree that the baby's future can be predicted from the yolk sac marks, then where will the experts in birth defects take us to learn the previous mental cause of either? Dr. Fisher may have carefully studied hundreds of cases, and he feels he has the right to create a new way to group them into types and kinds. But facts are facts. Outside of his area of study, even if we only judge by our own personal experience in various countries, it seems that there is plenty of available proof that strong maternal emotions are often shown in clear, visible, and lasting marks on the child. But the cases in question also seem to go against Dr. Fisher's idea that monstrous growths are due to causes that's found in the early stages of embryo or fetal life. One case was that of a judge of an imperial court at Saratov, Russia. He always wore a bandage to cover a mouse mark on the left side of his face. It was a perfectly formed mouse, whose body was raised on his cheek, and the tail went upward across his temple and disappeared into his hair. The body looked shiny, gray, and quite real. According to his own story, his mother had an uncontrollable dislike for mice, and her labor started early when she saw a mouse jump out from her sewing box. In another example, where the writer saw a pregnant lady, about 2 or 3 weeks before she was due to give birth, who saw a bowl of raspberries, and then she felt an uncontrollable desire for some, but she was told no. She excitedly clasped her right hand to her neck in a somewhat dramatic way and cried out that she must have them. The child born before our eyes, 3 weeks later, had a perfectly clear raspberry mark on the right side of his neck. To this day, when that fruit ripens, his birthmark turns a deep red, while during the winter, it is quite pale. Such cases as these, that many mothers know, either from their own lives or from friends, bring certainty. This is true despite the ideas of all of the experts in birth defects in Europe and America. It is because, for example, animals and plants are seen to produce badly formed members of their species, just like human beings. According to Megendi and his supporters, a mother's imagination does not cause human deformities, but their reasoning, that is of these kinds of issues in animals and plants, are not caused by the imagination either. If physical causes produce physical effects in the lower groups of living things, then the conclusion is that the same rule must apply to us. However, a completely new idea was brought up by Professor Armour, of the Long Island Medical College. This happened during a recent discussion at the Detroit Academy of Medicine. That was against the usual ideas that Dr. Fisher supports. Professor Armour says that bad formations come from one of two reasons. 1. A lack of something or an unhealthy state in the basic material from which the baby grows. 2. The unhealthy effects acting on the unborn baby in the womb. He states that the basic material includes every part of the body, its structure, and its form. He believes that there can be a passing down of acquired body traits that would make the basic material unable to produce a healthy and equally developed child. On the other hand, the basic material may be perfect itself, but if it is exposed to unhealthy effects during pregnancy, the child will, by necessity, be deformed. To be consistent, this idea must explain cases of double deformities, such as those with 2 heads or 2 limbs. That seems hard. But perhaps, we might agree that in faulty basic material, the head of the early form might not be there, or any other part of the body might be missing. But it hardly seems possible that there could be 2, 3, or more copies of a single body part. Again, if the basic material has a problem when passed down by the parents, it seems that all of the children born from it should be equally deformed. However, the truth is that in many cases the mother has given birth to a number of healthy children before the deformity appeared, and all from the same father. Dr. Fisher mentions many cases of this kind. Among others, he reads the case of Catherine Corcoran, a very healthy woman, 30 years of age. She had 5 healthy children before this deformed one was born, and none of those 5 were twins. It had a head at each end, 2 chests, with complete arms, 2 stomachs, and 2 hip parts joined end to end, with 4 legs placed 2 at each side, where the joining between the 2 happened. Some body parts were not doubled, so this was not the case of twins joining together. Another example is that of Maria Teresa Parodi. This woman had given birth to 8 well-formed children before, but then she delivered a female infant where only the upper part was double. But there are many cases where children who are born before and after a deformed child are perfectly healthy. If, on the other hand, the fact that deformed children are as common in animals as they are in humans, that is a widely accepted argument against the popular idea that these deformities are due to the mother's imagination, and if the fact that there is no difference between the egg cell of a mammal and a human is accepted, then what happens to Professor Armour's theory? In such a case, an example of an animal deformity is as good as that of a human deformity. This is what we read in Dr. Samuel L. Mitchell's paper, On Two-Headed Serpents. A female snake was killed, along with her whole group of young ones, totaling 120. Of these, 3 was deformed. 1 had 2 separate heads. 1 had a double head and only 3 eyes. And 1 had a double skull, with 3 eyes, and a single lower jaw, and this last one had 2 bodies. Surely the generative matter that produced these 3 deformities was the same matter that produced the other 117. Then the Armour theory is as incomplete as all of the rest. The problem comes from the faulty way of thinking that is often used, of induction. The induction method claims to gather, by experiment and observation, all of the facts within its reach. But deduction, the former method that was used, means collecting and examining experiments and drawing conclusions from them. According to the author of Philosophical Inquiry, who said, as this conclusion cannot be extended beyond what is supported by the experiments, induction is a tool of proof and limitation. Even though this limitation is found in every scientific search, it is rarely admitted. Instead, the ideas are built for us as if the experimenters have found them to be mathematically proven rules, when they are, at best, simple guesses. For a student of hidden philosophy, who in turn rejects the method of induction because of these constant limits, and fully accepts the Platonic way of dividing causes into the efficient, the formal, the material, and the final, as well as the Eleatic way of looking at any given statement, because it is natural to reason from the following viewpoint of the Neoplatonic school. 1. The subject either is as it is thought to be or it is not. Therefore, we will ask, does the universal ether, that's known by the Kabbalists as the astral light, contain electricity and magnetism, or does it not? The answer must be yes, because exact science itself teaches us that these 2 changeable forces fill both the air and the earth. Because there is a constant exchange of electricity and magnetism between them. With question number 1 settled, we will now need to examine what happens first, to it with respect to itself. Second, to it with respect to all other things. Third, with all other things, and with respect for it. Fourth, to all other things with respect to themselves. Here are the answers to how forces interact. 1. Regarding the force itself, qualities hidden in electricity before now become active when conditions are right. Sometimes this subtle, all-present force takes the shape of magnetism. But other times, it takes the shape of electric force. 2. Regarding the force with all other things, this force is attracted to anything that it has a natural liking for and is pushed away by everything else. 3. Regarding all other things with the force, whenever other things come into contact with electricity, they take on its mark. The strength of this mark depends on how well they conduct electricity. 4. Regarding all other things with themselves, under the push from the electric force, and depending on its strength, the tiny parts of other things change how they relate to each other. They might be pulled apart, destroying the object, whether it is living or not. Or if they were already out of balance, they might be brought back into balance. That happens in some diseases. Sometimes the change is only on the surface. Then the object might be marked with the image of another object that the fluid met before reaching it. To use these ideas in the current discussion, there are several well-known facts in science. For example, a pregnant woman is very open to physical and mental impressions, but body science tells us that her thinking skills are weaker, and even small events affect her more than usual. Her skin openings are more open, and she gives off a unique sweat, and she seems ready to receive all influences in nature. Reichenbach's followers say that her otic state is very strong. Dupotet warns against putting her in a magnetic trance without care, fearing it could affect the child, because her diseases can spread to the child, and often the child takes them completely on itself. Her pains and joys affect the child's mood as well as its health. It is a common saying that great men have great mothers, and the same is true the other way around. Megendi admits, it is true that her imagination has an influence on the unborn baby that goes against what he says elsewhere else. He also adds that sudden terror may cause the death of the unborn baby or slow its growth. In a recent case reported in American newspapers, a boy was killed by a lightning strike. When his clothes was removed, a clear picture of a tree was found on his chest. This tree grew near the window he was facing when the disaster happened, and the lightning also struck down the tree. Now this electrical picture, that's made by the blind forces of nature, gives us a way to understand how a mother's mental images are passed to her unborn child. Her pores are open. She gives off an otic release, that is just another form of the akasha, or the electricity, or life force. According to Reichenbach, this causes magnetic sleep, and therefore it is magnetism. Magnetic currents turn into electricity when they leave the body. When something makes a strong impression on the mother's mind, its image is instantly sent into the astral light, or the universal ether. Jevons and Babbage, as well as the authors of The Unseen Universe, tell us this is where the spiritual images of all forms are, and even human thoughts are stored there. Her magnetic releases attracts and joins with the descending current that already carries the image. Then it bounces back, and by hitting again, more or less strongly, it imprints itself on the unborn baby. This follows the very rule of body science, that shows how every feeling that the mother has affects her child. This is a Kabbalistic idea in a more hypothetical or harder to understand way than the theory of birth defects that was taught by the followers of Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire. Megendi rightly says that the theory of birth defects is found convenient and easy from its vagueness and obscurity, but claims to be nothing less than the creation of a new science. The idea behind it rests on certain laws that are not very clear, such as of arresting or of retarding, that is of a similar or eccentric position, especially of the Great Law, as it is called, that is of self for self. Eliphas Levi, who is surely one of the best sources on some points among Kabbalists, who says, pregnant women are more than others under the influence of the astral light. This light helps form their child and constantly shows them memories of shapes that it is filled with. Then it is a very good women that mislead those who watch them closely by unclear resemblances, because they often put an image that struck them in a dream onto the child of their marriage, and in this way, the same faces are kept from age to age. Then the Kabbalistic use of the pentagram can decide the look of an unborn baby. A woman who knows these secrets might give her son the features of Nereus or Achilles, as well as those of Louis XV, or Napoleon. If this confirms a different idea than Dr. Fisher's, he should be the last to object, because he himself admits, and his own example proves it, that one of the most powerful hindrances to the progress of science has always been a blind acceptance of authority. To free the mind from the control of mere authority, so it can freely study facts and laws that exist and are established in nature, that is the great and necessary step that needs to be took before scientific discovery can have lasting progress. If the mother's imagination can stop the growth or destroy the life of the unborn baby, then why can it not affect its physical appearance? Some surgeons have given their lives and money to find the cause for these deformities but have only reached the idea that they are simply coincidences. It would also be very illogical to say that animals do not have imagination. And while it might seem like the peak of deep thinking to even suggest that plants, like mimosas and insect-catching plants, have their own instinct and even a basic imagination, and the idea still has people who support it. If great physicists like Tyndall are forced to admit that even with intelligent and speaking humans, they cannot bridge the gap between mind and matter or define the powers of imagination, then how much greater must the mystery be about what happens in the brain of a speechless animal? What is imagination? Psychologists tell us that it is the flexible or creative power of the soul. But those who believe only in material things confuse it with fancy ideas. However, Wordsworth clearly showed the basic difference between the two in the introduction to his work of a collection of poems called Lyrical Ballads, but it is no longer acceptable to use the words interchangeably. Pythagoras said, "Imagination is the memory of earlier spiritual, mental, and physical states, while fancy ideas are the disorganized creation of the physical brain." No matter how we look at it, it is the age-old idea that matter was given life and made fruitful by the eternal idea, or imagination, that is where the abstract plans are at that prepare the model for the physical form, that cannot be proven wrong. If we reject this idea, the theory of a universe slowly growing out of its messy disorder becomes illogical. It is very unsound to think that lifeless matter is only moved by blind force and is guided by an intelligence that can form itself naturally into such a wonderfully balanced universe. If the soul of man truly comes from the essence of this universal soul, as a tiny piece of this first creative power, then it must, to some degree, share all of the qualities of the divine creating power. Just like the Creator, by breaking up the chaotic mass of dead unmoving matter, who shaped it into form, so man, if he knew his powers, could to a degree, do the same. Just like Phidias, by gathering loose clay and wetting it with water, that could give physical shape to the elegant idea brought forth by his creative ability, so the mother who knows her power can shape the coming child into whatever form she likes. Not knowing his powers, the sculptor only makes a lifeless, although beautiful, figure from still matter. Meanwhile, the mother's soul is strongly affected by her imagination. She unknowingly projects an image of the object that impressed it into the astral light. Then by a bouncing back action, that image is stamped on the unborn baby. Science tells us that the law of gravity assures us that any movement in the very heart of the earth will be felt throughout the universe. And we may even imagine that the same thing will hold true for those molecular motions that accompanies thought. Speaking of the transfer of energy throughout the universal ether or astral light, the same expert says, constant photographs of all events are then produced and kept. A large part of the energy of the universe may then be said to be put into such pictures. Dr. Fournier, of the National Deaf and Dumb Institute of France, in Chapter 2 of his work, when discussing the question of the unborn baby, he says that the strongest microscope cannot show us the slightest difference between the egg cell of a mammal and a man. And about the first or last movement of the egg, he asks, what is it? Does it have special qualities that sets it apart from every other egg? He correctly answers, until now, science has not replied to these questions. And without being a pessimist, I do not think that she ever will reply. From the day when her ways of searching will allow her to uncover the hidden process of the struggle of the principle of life with matter, then she will know life itself, and will be able to produce it. If our author had read the sermon of Pere Felix, how fittingly he might say his amen to the priest's cry, mystery. Mystery. Let's consider what Magendie assumed, especially when we looked at recorded examples of the imagination's power in creating strange deformities, even when it does not involve pregnant women. He agrees that these things happen daily in the young of lower animals. How does he explain the hatching of chickens with hawk heads? He must use the idea that the sight of the usual enemy affected the hen's imagination. This in turn passed a certain movement to the matter that made up the germ, that before fully forming, produced the strange chicks. We know of a similar case where a tame dove, owned by a lady we know, who was scared daily by a parrot. In her next group of young, there were 2 hatchlings with parrots' heads, and the likeness even included the color of the feathers. We could also mention Columella, Hewitt, and other experts, along with the experience of all animal breeders, to show that by stirring up the mother's imagination, the outer look of the young can be largely controlled. But these examples do not affect the idea of passing traits from parents to children, because they are simply special changes in types caused in an artificial way. Catherine Crowe discusses at great length the question of the mind's power over matter. She gives many well-proven examples to show this. Among others, that very strange event called stigmata, that clearly relates to this point. These marks appear on the bodies of people of all ages and is always a result of a very strong imagination. In the cases of the Tyrolese mystic, Catherine Emmerich, and many others, with the wounds of the crucifixion that are said to be as perfect as nature. A certain Madame B. von N. dreamed one night that someone offered her a red and a white rose, and that she chose the white one. On waking, she felt a burning pain in her arm. Slowly, the shape of a rose had appeared there, perfect in form and color. It was slightly raised above the skin. The mark grew stronger until the 8th day after, then it faded away. By the 14th day, it could no longer be seen. Two young ladies in Poland were standing by an open window during a storm. A flash of lightning struck near them, and the gold necklace on one of their necks melted. A perfect image of it was pressed onto her skin and it stayed there for life. The other girl, terrified by what happened to her friend, stood frozen with fear for several minutes, then fainted. Slowly, the same mark of a necklace that had been instantly printed on her friend's body appeared on her own. It stayed there for several years, then slowly disappeared. Dr. Justinus Kerner, the respected German author, tells an even more amazing case. At the time of the French invasion, a Cossack chased a Frenchman into a cul-de-sac, that's an alley with no way out. A terrible fight happened between them, in which the Frenchman was badly wounded. A person who had taken shelter in this tight space, and could not get away, was so terribly frightened that when he reached home, the very same wounds that the Cossack had given his enemy broke out on his body. In this situation, just like in cases where physical problems, and even death, results from a sudden strong feeling of the mind acting on the body, Magendie would find it hard to say the effect came from anything other than imagination. If he was a secret knowledge expert, like Paracelsus or Van Helmont, the question would lose its mystery, because he would understand the power of the human will and imagination. The will is knowing, and the imagination is not knowing, but they can cause physical and mental harm by using the universal force, not only on chosen victims, but also by bouncing it back to yourself without knowing it. It is a main rule of magic that if a flow of this subtle force is not pushed with enough strength to reach its target, it will bounce back to the person sending it. This is like a rubber ball bouncing back to the thrower's hand from a wall it hits without going through. Many cases are given where amateur magic users hurt themselves. Van Helmont says, the strong imaginative power of a woman creates an idea. This idea is the link between the body and spirit. The idea transfers itself to the being with whom the woman is most closely connected to, and puts that image on them that most stirred her. Deleuze has gathered many amazing facts from Van Helmont in his book Library of Animal Magnetism. Among these, we will only quote the following as examples similar to the bird hunter, Jacques Pellissier. He says, by a man looking steadily at an animal, while he is with fixed eyes and with focused attention for 15 minutes, he can cause their death. Rousseau confirms this from his own experience in Egypt, and in the East, by saying he killed several toads this way. But when he finally tried this in lions, the toad, finding it could not escape from his eye, turned around, puffed itself up, and stared at him so fiercely, without moving its eyes, that he felt weak, even to the point of fainting, and for some time, people thought he was dead. But to go back to the topic of strange births, Wierus, in his book on the illusions of demons, tells of a child born to a woman, but not long before its birth, her husband threatened her, saying she had the devil in her and that he would kill the devil. The mother's fear was so great that her child appeared well-shaped from the middle downward, but upward it was spotted with blackish-red spots, with eyes on its forehead, a mouth like a satyr, ears like a dog, and bent horns on its head like a goat. In a book about demons by Paramentus, there is a story of a monster born at St. Lawrence, in the West Indies, in the year 1573. The Duke of Medina, known as Sidonia, confirms this story to be true. The child, besides the terrible ugliness of its mouth, ears, and nose, had 2 horns on the head, like those of young goats, long hair on its body, a fleshy belt around its middle that looked doubled, and from this hung a piece of flesh like a purse, and a bell of flesh in its left hand, like those the Indians use when they dance. It had white boots of flesh on its legs, that was doubled down. In short, the whole shape was horrible and devilish. It was believed to come from some fear the mother had gotten from the strange dances of the Indians. But Dr. Fisher rejects all such examples as unproven and imaginary. We will not bore the reader with more examples of strange births from the many found in well-known books. The examples given are enough to show that there is reason to believe that these unusual body types are due to how the mother's mind and the universal ether affect each other. If anyone questions the authority of Van Helmont as a man of science, we will direct them to the work of Fournier, the well-known body scientist. On page 717, in the following description of Van Helmont's character that can be found, Van Helmont was a very outstanding chemist. He had studied gases and gave them the name gas. At the same time, he pushed his religious devotion to a mysterious level, by giving himself completely to thinking about God. Van Helmont stands out above all before him by connecting the principle of life directly, and somewhat through experiments, as he tells us, with the smallest movements of the body. We cannot understand the constant action of this entity. He did not link it with material elements but saw it as a separate being. Still, a famous school has built its main foundation on this entity. Van Helmont's principle of life, or archeus, is simply the astral light of all the Kabbalists and is the universal ether of modern science. If the less important marks on an unborn baby are not caused by the mother's imagination, then what other reason would Megendi give for the growth of hard scales, goat horns, and with the hairy coats of animals? We have seen these strange marking on children in the examples above. Surely there were no hidden beginnings of these special animal features that could grow under a sudden push from the mother's imagination. In short, the only possible explanation is the one given by those skilled in hidden occult sciences. Before leaving this topic, we want to say a few more words about cases where the head, arm, and hand instantly disappeared, even though it was clear that in each case the child's entire body had been perfectly formed. What is a child's body made of at birth? Chemists will tell us it is a dozen pounds of hardened gas and a few ounces of ash, some water, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, carbonic acid, a little lime, magnesium, phosphorus, and a few other minerals. That is all. Where did these come from? How were they brought together? How were these particles, that Mr. Proctor tells us about, pulled in from the depths of space that's surrounding us on all sides, that formed and shaped into a human being? We have seen that it is useless to ask the leading scientific group that Megendi famously represents. He admits that they know nothing about how the unborn baby gets food, digests, or circulates blood. But the study of the body teaches us that while the egg is inside the Grothian bubble that it shares in, that is a full part of the mother's general structure. When the bubble breaks, it becomes almost as separate from her, regarding what will build the body of the future being, as the germ in a bird's egg after the mother has laid it in the nest. There is certainly very little in the proven facts of science to go against the idea that the relationship of the unborn child to the mother is not much different from a renter to a house. Because the renter depends on the house for safety, warmth, and comfort also. According to Democritus, the soul comes from atoms gathering together. Plutarch describes Democritus's ideas like this: there are endless substances that are whole and still. They have no differences or qualities. They move in space, where they are spread out, and when they come close, they join, link together, and by gathering, they form water, fire, a plant, or a man. All of these substances that he calls atoms because they are solid, that cannot change or be altered. But Plutarch adds, we cannot make a color from something that has no color, nor a substance or soul from something that has no soul or has no good qualities. Professor Balfour Stewart says that this idea, that was used by John Dalton, has allowed the human mind to grasp the laws that control chemical changes, as well as to imagine what is happening. After quoting Bacon's idea with approval, that men are always looking into nature's farthest limits, then he sets a rule that he and his fellow thinkers would do well to follow. He says, surely we should be very careful before we dismiss any area of knowledge or way of thinking as truly useless. These are strong words, but how many scientists actually live by them? Democritus of Abdera shows us space filled with atoms. Our modern astronomers let us see how these atoms form into worlds, and later into the groups of people, including our own, who live on them. Since we have pointed out that the human will has a power, that by focusing flows with those atoms to a target, that can create a child that matches the mother's desire. Then why is it not completely believable that this same power from the mother, can by a strong, although unknown, reversal of those flows, make any part or even the whole body of her unborn child disappear and vanish? And here comes the question of false pregnancies, that has often completely confused both doctors and patients. If the head, arm, and hand of the 3 children mentioned by Van Helmont could disappear because of extreme horror, then why not the same or some other strong emotion that's felt to a similar degree, that's the cause of the complete disappearance of the unborn baby, in a so-called false pregnancy? Such cases are rare, but they do happen, and they completely puzzle science. There is certainly no chemical strong enough in the mother's blood flow to dissolve her child without harming herself. We offer this topic to the medical field, hoping that as a group they will not take the conclusion of Fournier, who says, in this series of events we must limit ourselves to the role of historian, as we have not even tried to explain the whys and wherefores of these things, because there lies the unknowable mysteries of life, and as we go further in our explanation, we will have to recognize that this is forbidden ground to us. Within the limits of his thinking abilities, the true thinker knows no forbidden ground. He should be willing to accept no mystery of nature as unknowable or as not sacred. No student of Hermetic philosophy, nor any spiritualist, will disagree with the basic rule that was set by Hume, and by a miracle that is impossible. To think such a thing is possible would mean the universe is governed by special rules instead of general rules that can be known. This is one of the basic disagreements between science and religious study. The former, using common experience, holds that nature usually follows a general pattern. Science assumes that a ruling mind can be asked to stop a general rule to fit special situations. John Stuart Mill says, if we do not already believe in these supernatural powers, then no miracle can prove to us of their existence. The miracle itself, that's seen only as an unusual fact, but may be reliably confirmed by our senses, or by the statements of what others say. But nothing can ever prove that it is a miracle. There is still one more possible idea: it is the result of some unknown natural cause. This possibility cannot be completely ruled out, forcing us to accept the idea of a being greater than nature stepping in. This is exactly what we have tried to make clear to our thinkers and physicists. As Mr. Mill himself says, we cannot accept an idea as a law of nature and yet believe in something real that goes against it. We must disbelieve the new fact or believe that we were wrong in accepting the supposed law. Mr. Hume reads of the firm and unchanging experience of mankind as setting up the laws whose work by their very nature makes miracles impossible. The problem lies in his use of the word unchanging, because this assumes that our experience will never change. Because if we assumes this belief, as a result we will always have the same experiments and observations to use for our judgment. This way of thinking also assumes that all thinkers will have the same facts to consider. And it completely ignores historical records of philosophical experiments and scientific discoveries that we might have temporarily lost. For example, because the Alexandrian library burned and Nineveh was destroyed, then the world was for many centuries without the necessary information to truly understand the hidden and open knowledge of ancient times. However, in recent years, the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, the Ebers, Daubigny, Anastasi, and other papyri, and the digging up of the clay tablet libraries, that has opened up a new area of historical study. This is likely to lead to big changes in this firm and unchanging experience. The author of the book Supernatural Religion rightly observes that a person who believes anything that goes against a full conclusion from the facts does so simply because of an idea that cannot be proven, and they are simply gullible. But such an idea cannot affect the real proof for that thing. In a speech given by Mr. Hiram Corson, a professor of Anglo-Saxon literature at Cornell University, in Ithaca, New York, to the alumni of St. John's College, Annapolis, in July 1875, the speaker rightly criticized science. He says, "There are things that science can never do, and is arrogant to try to do." There was a time when religion and the church went beyond their proper area, and bothered science, and put a heavy burden on science. But it seems that their past relations with each other are completely changing. Science has crossed its borders and is entering the area of religion and church. Instead of a religious papacy, we are in danger of being brought under a scientific papacy. We are in fact already brought under this type of a papacy. And just as in the 16th century a protest was made, for the sake of intellectual freedom, against a religious and church dictatorship, so, in the 19th century, the spiritual and eternal interests of man demands that a protest should be made against a rapidly growing scientific dictatorship. Scientists should not only stay within their proper area of things that can be observed and limited, but should re-examine their ideas and information, so that we may make sure how much actual scientific information is actually based on reality and truth. If this is not done in science as well as in normal business, scientists are likely to set their worth too high, and as a result, carry on a dangerously inflated business. The responses to Professor Tyndall's Belfast address revealed that many intelligent, non-scientific people had overestimated the value of the evolution school of philosophy that he represented. It is quite surprising to a non-scientific person to learn about the large area of pure guesses that surrounds established science. Scientists often brag about this area as if it was part of their solid-in-one victories. Exactly, but at the same time, they deny the same right to others. They protest against the miracles of the Church but reject, with just as much logic, strange modern events. Given that scientific experts like Dr. Humans and others admit that modern science is going through a period of change, it seems it is time that people should stop thinking certain things that are unbelievable, just because they are amazing and because they seem to go against what we usually consider universal laws. There are quite a few well-meaning men in this century who want to defend the memory of science's martyrs like Agrippa, Palissy, and Cardan. However, they fail, due to a lack of understanding, to grasp their ideas correctly. They wrongly believe that the Neoplatonists paid more attention to deep philosophy than to exact science. Professor Draper notes, the failures that Aristotle himself so often shows are not proof that his method is unreliable. Instead, they show it can be trusted, because they are failures that come from not having enough facts. What facts, we might ask? A scientist cannot be expected to agree that these facts can be given by hidden science, since he does not believe in hidden science. However, the future may prove of its truth. Aristotle has given his way of starting a method to our scientists, but until they add the universals of Plato to it, they will have even more failures than the great teacher of Alexander. The universals are a matter of faith, only as long as they cannot be shown by reason that's based on continuous experience. Which of our current thinkers can prove by this same way of starting a method, that the ancients did not have such proofs for many of their secret studies? Their own denials, that are not supported by proof and show well enough that they do not always follow the method they brag about so much. Because they must, whether they want to or not, base their ideas on the foundation of the ancient thinkers, or their modern discoveries are just the new growths from the seeds planted by the old ones. And yet, even these discoveries are usually incomplete, if not failures. Their cause is unclear, and their final effect is not foreseen. Professor Humans says, we are not to see the past ideas as simply wrong ideas that have been disproven, nor present ideas as final. Because the living and growing body of truth has only changed its old coverings as it moves toward a higher and stronger state. This language that's used about modern chemistry by one of the best philosophical chemists and most enthusiastic science writers of the day, who shows the changing state that we find modern science in. But what is true for chemistry is true for all its related sciences. Since the start of spiritualism, doctors and disease experts are more ready than ever to see great thinkers like Paracelsus and Van Helmont as superstitious fakers and tricksters. They make fun of their ideas about the archeus, or anima mundi, as well as the importance they gave to knowing how the stars work. Yet, how much real progress has medicine made since the days when Lord Bacon called it a conjectural science, meaning it's based on guesses? Thinkers like Democritus, Aristotle, Euripides, Epicurus, or rather his writer, Lucretius, Aeschylus, and other ancient writers, whom materialists so willingly quote as strong opponents of the dreamy Platonists, that was only theorists, who was not masters of hidden knowledge. The masters, when they did write, either had their books burned by angry Christian groups or they wrote them in a way that only those who were initiated could understand. Which of their modern critics can promise that he knows everything that they knew? Diocletian alone burned whole libraries of works about the secret arts. But not one was writing about how to make gold and silver escape the anger of this rough ruler. Arts and civilization had reached such a high level in what are now called the Archaic Ages that we learn, through Champollion, that Athothi, the second king of the first dynasty, who wrote a book on body structure. King Necho wrote about astrology and astronomy. Blantisus and Cintras were two learned mapmakers from those days before Moses. Elian speaks of the Egyptian Iacchus, whose memory was honored for centuries for his amazing achievements in medicine. He stopped the spread of several diseases simply with certain fumigations, meaning smoke. A book by Apollonides, called Arapios, is mentioned by Theophilus, a church leader of Antioch. It is titled The Divine Book and gives the secret life story and origin of all of the gods of Egypt. Ammianus Marcellinus speaks of a secret work that noted the exact age of the bull Apis. This was a key to many mysteries and cycles. What has happened to all of these books, and who knows the valuable learning they may have held? We know only one thing for sure. That it was pagan and Christian destroyers, who destroyed such literary treasures wherever they could find them. Also, Emperor Alexander Severus traveled all over Egypt to collect the sacred books on mysticism and mythology, and robbing every temple he found. Also, the Ethiopians, who were as old as the Egyptians in arts and sciences, that claimed to be older in ancient times as well as in learning than the Egyptians. And they might well have been, because they were known in India at the very earliest start of history. We also know that Plato learned more secrets in Egypt than he was allowed to mention. And according to Champollion, all that is truly good and scientific in Aristotle's works, that are so valued today by our modern thinkers who use induction, is due to his divine master. And as a logical result, since Plato shared the deep secrets that he had learned from the priests of Egypt orally, together with his initiated students, who in turn passed it from one generation to another of masters, these masters know more about the hidden powers of nature than our thinkers of today. Now, we should talk about the works of Hermes Trismegistus. Who, or how many people, have had the chance to read them as they were in the Egyptian holy places? In his book Egyptian Mysteries, Iamblichus says Hermes wrote 1,100 books. Seleucus counts no less than 20,000 of his works before the time of Menes. Eusebius saw only 42 of these in his time, he says. The last of the 6 books on medicine talked about that art as it was practiced in the very old times. And Diodorus says that it was the oldest of the lawmakers, who was Navis, the third person after Menes, who got them from Hermes. Most of the writings that have come down to us are just Latin retranslations of Greek translations. These were mainly made by the Neoplatonists from the original books that was kept by some masters of hidden knowledge. Marsilius Ficinus, who was the first to publish them in Venice in 1488, gave us only small parts. The most important sections seem to have been either messed up or left out on purpose, because it was too risky to publish in those days about the auto de fe, that was public punishment for heresy. So, as it happens now, when a Kabbalist who has spent his whole life studying hidden knowledge and has learned the great secret, dares to say that the Kabbalah alone leads to knowing the absolute in the infinite, and the indefinite in the finite, but he is laughed at by those who know it is impossible to square the circle as a physical problem, or to deny it can be done in a spiritual sense. According to the biggest experts, psychology is a part of science that is almost completely unknown so far. Physiology, according to Fournier, who is one of its French experts, but is in such a bad state that he says in the introduction to his learned work Physiology of the Nervous System, and we finally understand that it is not only the physiology of the brain that's not worked out, but it is also no physiology whatsoever of the nervous system that exists. Chemistry has been completely changed in the past few years. So, like all new sciences, this young field cannot be seen as very stable yet. Geology has not yet been able to tell us how long humans have existed. Astronomy, the most exact of sciences, is still guessing and confused about cosmic energy and of many other important things. In anthropology, Mr. Wallace tells us there are big differences in opinions on some of the most important questions about the nature and origin of man. Medicine has been called nothing more than scientific guesswork by many famous doctors. Everywhere there is incompleteness, but there is nowhere where there is perfection. When we look at these serious men searching in the dark to find the missing parts of their broken chains, they seem to us like people starting from a common, confusing deep hole, and taking different paths. Each of these paths ends up at the edge of a deep gap that they cannot explore. On one side, they lack the way to go down into its hidden depths. On the other hand, they are pushed back in each attempt by jealous guards who will not let them pass. And so, they continue watching the lower forces of nature and from time to time telling the public about their great discoveries. Did they truly not jump on this vital force and catch it playing its game of connection with chemical and physical forces? Yes, they did. But if we ask them where this vital force comes from, and how it is that they, who strongly believed a short time ago, that matter could be destroyed and vanish, but now believe just as strongly that it is indestructible and eternal, and are unable to tell us more about it. Why are they forced in this case, as in many others, to return to an idea that was spoken of by Democritus 24 centuries ago? Ask them, and this is how they'll answer: creating or destroying matter, and increasing or decreasing matter, lies beyond the area of science, because her area is limited entirely to the changes of matter, but the area of science lies within the limits of these changes. Then creation and destruction lie outside of her area. Oh no, they only lie outside the understanding of materialistic scientists. But why do we say the same of science itself? And if they say that this force cannot be destroyed, except by the same power that created it, then they silently admit such a power exists. Therefore, they have no right to block the way of those, who being braver than themselves, from trying to go beyond the limits but find that they can only do so by lifting the veil of Isis. But surely, among all of these incomplete parts of science, there must be at least one that is complete. It seems to us that we heard a great noise of praise, as the voice of many waters, about the discovery of protoplasm. But sadly, when we turn to read Mr. Huxley, who is the learned creator of this new discovery, that is found saying, in perfect strictness, it is true that chemical investigation can tell us little or nothing directly of the makeup of living matter, and it is also in strictness true that we know nothing about the makeup of any body whatsoever, as it is. Then this is a sad admission indeed. It seems that Aristotle's method of reasoning from specific facts to general rules is a failure in some cases after all. This also seems to explain why this model thinker, with all of his careful study of small details before moving to big ideas, said that the earth was in the center of the universe. Meanwhile, Plato, who got lost in the complex ideas of Pythagorean wild notions and started from general rules, knew the sun-centered system perfectly well. We can easily prove this fact by using the mentioned method for Plato's benefit. We know that the Sodalian oath of those initiated into the mysteries, that kept them from sharing their knowledge with the world in plain words. Champollion says, it was the dream of his life to write a work and to record it in the ideas that's taught by the Egyptian priests fully. He often talked of it but found himself forced to stop because of the solemn oath. Now, judging our modern-day thinkers by the opposite method, meaning arguing from general rules to specific facts, and setting aside individual scientists to simply give our opinion of them as a whole, but we are forced to suspect this very respected group of having extremely small feelings toward their older ancient and very old brothers. It really seems as if they always had in mind the saying, "Put out the sun, and the stars will shine." We have heard a French academician, who is a man of deep learning, that said he would gladly give up his own good name to have the record of the many ridiculous mistakes and failures of his coworkers removed from public memory. But these failures cannot be remembered too often when we are trying to understand our claims in the topic that we support. The time will come when the children of scientists, unless they get the spiritual blindness of their doubting parents, will be ashamed of the shameful focus on material things and the narrow-mindedness of their fathers. To use a phrase from the respected William Howitt, they hate new truths as much as the owl and the thief hate the sun. Just knowing things in an intellectual way, but you cannot understand what spiritual is, such as the sun puts out a fire, so the spirit blinds the eyes of mere intellect. It is an old story from the days when the preacher wrote, "The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing." Scientists have acted as if the saying was written to describe their own mental state. How Mr. Lecky, who was a rationalist himself, unknowingly shows this tendency in men of science to mock all new things, in his description on how educated men react to a story of a miracle happening. He says, they receive it with absolute and even mocking disbelief, which means they do not even bother to check the evidence. What's more, they become so filled with this usual doubt once they enter the academy, that they turn around and become the ones who persecute in turn. Howitt says, it is a strange fact of science that Benjamin Franklin, who himself had been made fun of by his countrymen for trying to connect lightning and electricity, that was one of the Committee of Wise Men in Paris, in 1778, who looked into the claims of mesmerism, but called it complete fakery. If men of science would only limit themselves to doubting new discoveries, there might be some small excuse for them. This could be because of their habit of being set in their ways, that comes from long periods of careful examination. But they not only claim to have original ideas that are not true, but they also rudely dismiss all claims that the people from ancient times knew as much, or even more than they did. It is a shame that in each of their laboratories there is not this writing from Ecclesiastes hanging up. Is there anything where it may be said, "See, this is new? It has already been of old times, that was before us." In the verse that comes after the one quoted here, the wise man says, "There is no remembrance of former things." So, this saying may explain every new denial. Mr. Meldrum may receive praise for his weather observations of cyclones in the Mauritius. Mr. Baxendale, from Manchester, may speak cleverly of the Earth's convection currents. Dr. Carpenter and Commander Maury may map out the equatorial current for us. And Professor Henry may show us how the moist wind drops its water to form small streams and rivers, only to be taken from the ocean again and returned to the hilltops. But listen to what Koheleth says: the wind goes toward the south and turns around, then it goes back to the north. It spins around continuously, and the wind returns again according to its paths. All of the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full, and back to the place from where the rivers come from, there they will return again. The idea of how heat and moisture are spread by the rising and falling currents between the equator and the poles, that is quite new. But the hint for this has been in our most common book, unnoticed, for almost 3,000 years. Even now, when we quote it, we must remember that Solomon was a Kabbalist. In the text mentioned, he was simply repeating what was written thousands of years before his time. Modern scholars, who's cut off from half of the universe's facts, especially the most important half, naturally cannot create a system of thought that satisfies themselves, let alone others. They are like men in a coal mine, who work all day and come out only at night. Because of this, they cannot truly see or understand the beauty and glory of the sunshine. To them, life only lasts as long as human activity. The future, in their intellectual view, is just a deep dark hole. But no hope of endless research, achievement, and resulting joy softens the harshness of present life. The only reward for their effort is earning enough to eat today, and the faint, useless thought that their names might not be forgotten for a few years after they are buried. For them, death means the end of life's flame and the scattering of the lamp's pieces across endless space. Berzelius, the great chemist, cried at his last moment and said, "Do not wonder why I weep. You will not believe me, a weak man, nor think I am afraid of what the doctor has to tell me. I am ready for all. But I have to say goodbye to science, and you should not wonder that it costs me a lot." How sad must be the thoughts of such a great student of nature as this, to be forced to stop halfway through a big study of the building of a grand system, or to stop the discovery of a mystery that had confused mankind for ages, that the dying thinker had dared to hope that he might solve. Look at the world of science today. See the atomic theorists trying to fix the worn-out robes. That shows how flawed their separate fields are. See them mending the bases that the idols are to set up on again, that had fallen from where they were worshipped before this new idea was dug up from Democritus's tomb by John Dalton. In the vast sea of material science, they cast their nets, only to have the holes torn when some unexpected and huge problem comes their way. Its water is like the Dead Sea, bitter to taste. It is so thick that they can barely get into it, much less dive into its bottom. It has no way out and no life beneath its waves or along its edges. It is a dark, frightening, pathless wasteland, giving nothing worth having, because what it gives is without life and without soul. There was a time when learned academics made fun of simple descriptions of wonders that ancient people said they had seen. How foolish, perhaps even dishonest, these ancients seemed in the eyes of an educated century. Did they not actually describe horses and other animals whose feet looked somewhat like human hands and feet? And in AD 1876, we hear Mr. Huxley giving learned lectures where the Protohippus had a forearm somewhat like humans, and the Orohippus with its 4 toes an ancient origin, and the imagined pedactyl equus, that is the maternal granduncle of the present horse, who played the most important part. The wonder is proven true. The doubting materialists of the 19th century confirms the beliefs of the supposedly superstitious Platonists, who is the ancient gullible people. And before Mr. Huxley, Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire had shown an example of a horse that truly had fingers separated by skin. When the ancients spoke of a pygmy race in Africa, they were accused of lying. And yet, pygmies like these were seen and studied by a French scientist during his trip in the Tenda Maya, on the banks of the Rio Grande in 1840. They were also seen by Bayard Taylor at Cairo in 1874, and by M. Bond, of the Indian Trigonometrical Survey, who found a wild, small race living in the hill jungles of the Western Ghats, to the southwest of the Palani Hills. This race, although often heard of, had not been found before by the survey. This is a new pygmy race that's similar to the African Obongos of Du Shiyu, the Akas of Schweinfurt, and the Dokos of Dr. Kraft in their size, appearance, and habits. Herodotus was thought to be crazy for speaking of people who he was told slept during a night that lasted 6 months. If we explain the word slept as a simple misunderstanding, it will be very easy to explain the rest as a hint to the night in the polar regions. Pliny has many facts in his work that until very recently were rejected as made-up stories. Among others, he mentions a race of small animals whose males suckled their young ones. This idea caused much amusement among our wise men. In his report of the Geological Survey of the Territories, for 1872, Mr. C.H. Merriam describes a rare and amazing type of rabbit, a Lepus bairdi, living in the pine areas around the sources of the Wind and Yellowstone rivers, in Wyoming. Mr. Merriam got 5 examples of this animal, that are the first individuals of the species that has ever been brought before the scientific world. One very strange fact is that all of the males have nipples and take part in suckling their young. Adult males had large nipples full of milk, and the hair around the nipple of one was wet and stuck to it, showing that, when caught, he had been feeding his young. In the Carthaginian story of Hanno's early sea voyages, a long description was found of savage people, whose bodies were hairy and whom the interpreters called gorilla. Anthroponagrian, as the text reads, that clearly means that these wild men were monkeys. Until our current century, this statement was seen as an unimportant story, and Dodwell completely rejected the truthfulness of the writing and its contents. The famous Atlantis is said by the latest modern expert and translator of Plato's works, that is said to be one of Plato's noble lies. Even the philosopher's honest admission in the Timaeus, they say, that in their time the inhabitants of this island, called Poseidon, preserved a tradition handed down by their ancestors concerning the existence of the Atlantic island that was an impressive size, etc., but does not save the great teacher from being accused of lying by the infallible modern school. Among the large number of people living in the very religious ignorance of the Middle Ages, there was only a few students of the old Hermetic philosophy. These students used what they had taught them to predict discoveries that our current age brags about. At the same time, the ancestors of our great modern leaders of science that were still finding Satan's hoof prints in simple natural events. Professor A. Wilder says, Roger Bacon, who lived in the 13th century, in his thoughts on the admirable force of art and nature, that dedicates the first part of his work to natural facts. He hints at gunpowder and praises the use of steam as a driving power. The hydraulic press, the diving bell, and kaleidoscope are all described. The ancients spoke of water changing into blood, of blood rain, and of snowstorms during which the earth was covered for many miles with the snow of blood. This fall of red particles has been proven, like everything else, to be only a natural event. It has happened at different times, but its cause remains a puzzle even today. In 1825, when the waters of Lake Marat had seemingly turned into a thick blood, de Candolle, a very famous botanist of this century, tried to prove that the event could be easily explained. He said it was caused by the growth of countless numbers of those half-plant, half-tiny animals that he called Oscillatoria rubescens. These formed the connection between animal and plant life. Elsewhere, we describe the red snow that Captain Ross saw in the Arctic regions. Many writings have been done on this topic by the most important naturalists, but no two of them agree on their guesses. Some call it pollen powder of a type of pine, others say it is small insects. Professor Aagaard very honestly admits that he does not know how to explain the cause of such events or the nature of the red substance. People say that what everyone agrees on is undeniable proof of truth, and what has been agreed on more by civilized people and even the most uncivilized for thousands of years, are those who have a strong and unwavering belief in magic. Magic only goes against the laws of nature in the minds of those who don't understand it. If such lack of understanding is regrettable in ancient, uneducated groups, then why don't our civilized and highly educated Christians regret it in themselves too? The mysteries of the Christian religion has not been able to stand a crucial test any more than biblical miracles have. Magic, in its true sense, provides a clue to the wonders of Aaron's rod and the tricks of Pharaoh's magicians who opposed Moses. And it does this without hurting the general truthfulness of the writers of Exodus or by claiming more for the prophet of Israel than for others. It also does not allow for the possibility of a single instance where a miracle can happen against the laws of nature. Among many miracles, we can choose the one where the river turned into blood for our example. The text says, "Take your rod and stretch out your hand with the rod in it upon the waters, streams, etc. until they become blood." We do not hesitate to say that we have seen the same thing happen repeatedly on a small scale, although the experiment was not done on a river in those cases. From the time of Van Helmont, who in the 17th century, despite being made fun of, was willing to give the real instructions for the so-called creation of eels, frogs, and various tiny creatures, even all the way down to the supporters of spontaneous generation in our own century. But it has been known that such a quick growth of living things is possible without needing a miracle to go against natural law. The experiments of Pasteur and Spallanzani, and the debate between those who believed in omnipresent life germs and those who believed in spontaneous generation, like Buffon's followers, including Needham, that has been discussed publicly for too long for us to doubt that living things can be brought into existence whenever there is air in good conditions of moisture and the right temperature. And the records of the official meetings of the Academy of Sciences of Paris contains accounts of frequent appearances of such showers of blood-red snow and water. These blood spots were called leper vestuum, but they were just this lichen-infused tiny organisms. They was first seen in 786 and 959, and in both years great plagues happened. Whether these zoocarps were plants or animals is unknown to this day, and no naturalist would risk saying for sure what part of nature's living kingdom they belong to. Modern chemists can no longer deny that such germs can quickly grow in a suitable environment and in an incredibly short amount of time. Now, if chemistry has, on one hand, found ways to remove floating germs from the air, and if under the opposite conditions they can grow, or allow these organisms to grow, then why could the magicians of Egypt not do so too, with their enchantments? It is far easier to believe that Moses, who according to Manetho, had been an Egyptian priest and had learned all of the secrets of the land of Chemia, and had produced miracles according to natural laws. This is easier than believing that God himself broke the established order of his universe. We repeat that we have seen this reddening of water produced by Eastern masters of hidden knowledge. It can be done in either of two ways. The first way, the experimenter used a magnetic rod that was strongly charged with electricity. He passed this rod over an amount of water in a metal basin, that's following a set process that we cannot describe more fully at present. In about 10 hours, the water brought up a reddish foam. After 2 more hours, this became a type of lichen, like the Lepraria kermesina of Baron Vronel. It then changed into a blood-red jelly that made the water a crimson liquid, and 24 hours later, this liquid was full of living organisms. The second way to do the experiment involved thickly scattering the surface of a slow-moving stream that has a muddy bottom with the powder of a plant that has been dried in the sun and has been ground into a powder. Although this powder seemed to be carried away by the stream, some of it must have settled to the bottom, because on the following morning, the water at the surface thickened and appeared covered with what de Candolle describes as oscillatoria rubescens, of a crimson-red color, and he believes it to be the connecting link between plant and animal life. Considering this, we do not see why the skilled alchemists and physicists of the Mosaic period could not have also known the natural secret of growing countless numbers of a type of bacteria in just a few hours. The spores of these bacteria are found in the air, water, and most plant and animal parts. The rod was just as important in the hands of Aaron and Moses as it was in all of the so-called magic mummeries of the Kabbalist magicians in the Middle Ages. Now these practices are thought of as foolish superstition and fakery. The rod of Paracelsus, called his Kabbalistic trident, and the famous wands of Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, and Henry Cunrath, that should be respected just as much as the measuring rod of our modern doctors who use electromagnetism. Things that seemed ridiculous and impossible to the uneducated fakers and even knowledgeable scientists of the last century are now starting to appear possible, and in many cases, they are proven facts. In fact, some knowledgeable fakers and uneducated scientists are even starting to admit this truth. In a text kept by Eusebius, by Porphyry, in his letter to Anebo, who asks Quaremon, the hierogrammatist, to prove that the idea of magic arts, whose masters could terrify even the gods, that was truly accepted by Egyptian wise men. Now, keeping in mind the rule of historical evidence put forward by Mr. Huxley in his Nashville speech, 2 conclusions are very clear. First, Porphyry was known as a highly moral and honorable man who did not exaggerate his statements. He was not able to lie about this matter, and he did not lie. Second, since he was so knowledgeable in every area of human understanding that he cared about, it was very unlikely that he would be tricked about the magic arts, and he was not tricked. Therefore, the idea of chances, which supports Professor Huxley's theory, that makes us believe two things. 1. The magic arts truly existed. 2. That they were known and practiced by the Egyptian magicians and priests, whom even Sir David Brewster agrees that they were men of deep scientific skills.